Good morning, Taft. 10 years ago, when I interviewed with Mr. Mack for a job teaching history at Taft, I had just come off of a short 10-year career in the U.S. Navy, flying F-18 Hornets as a naval aviator. And Mr. Mack asked me, Colin, you've never taught history before, you've never taught before. Do you think you can handle standing in front of a group of 16-year-olds firing off eager questions at you about history? And I said, Willie, I've flown Hornets off of aircraft carriers at night. I've given mission briefs and debriefs to admirals. I think I can handle a bunch of teenagers. And 10 years on, I guess I would say that two things. First of all, sometimes the teenagers are a lot tougher than the admirals. And the second thing is, Willie, when I said I'd briefed and debriefed admirals, I meant one-star admirals, not the vice chief and the chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So, with a little bit of nervousness, I'm here to introduce today the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen. Mike Mullen hails from Los Angeles, California, graduated in 1968 from the U.S. Naval Academy, and from there became a surface warfare officer, where he served on a variety of Navy ships, and then had command of his own ships, including a gasoline tanker, a guided missile destroyer, and the guided missile cruiser USS Yorktown. Having made Admiral, he commanded several battle fleets and later NATO joint forces and U.S. naval forces in Europe. Ashore, he served in a variety of leadership positions, including at the Naval Academy, in the Pentagon, and in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He's a graduate of the Advanced Management Program at Harvard Business School, holds a Master's in Science and Operations Research from the Naval Postgraduate School, and from 2007 to 2011, Admiral Mullen served as the 28th Chief of Naval Operations and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the most senior position in the U.S. military. Now, what does the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff do? Well, a simple definition is that he is the senior member, the head of a committee of senior officers comprised of each of the most senior officers in each of the services in the U.S. in the military. But it's much more than that. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is, operationally speaking, the president's right-hand man on all matters of national security. He has his fingers on the pulse of U.S. military operations around the world, including recently, of course, conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Libya. He's responsible for forces that maintain global sea lanes. He's responsible for readiness of all forces, domestic and deployed overseas, and of our strategic forces, including the nuclear triad. He conducts relations with dozens of allies around the world. But more than that, in the early 21st century, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is concerned with a number of broader issues every morning when he wakes up and gets that first cup of coffee. And these include, no doubt, conflict prevention around the world, humanitarian relief needed as a result of natural disasters, economic crises, or failing states, cyber warfare, the Space Command with its nuances of espionage and missile defense, counterterrorism around the world, including denial of sanctuaries for terrorists, disruption of their operations, and sometimes the hunt for terrorist leaders like Osama bin Laden. He also worries about nuclear weapons proliferation. And most recently, of course, that means especially relations with Iran and North Korea. And broadly speaking, he's at the center of U.S. policy during dynamic, fluid situations such as the Arab Spring, in which all of the above concerns merge and overlap. In short, Admiral Mullen was, for 4 years, at the center of almost all aspects of international policy. And so, if you think your life at Taft is a little bit stressful and busy, imagine Admiral Mullen's. So we are extremely fortunate to welcome to Taft a man with a proven knowledgeable leader who has experienced nearly all aspects of international relations. His professionalism, character, and service to others exemplify the school motto. And I would add that it is a rare and special opportunity not just to hear him today, but to be able to ask questions and talk with him, which I know you'll be eager to do after this meeting and during F, D, and C blocks. And so now please join me in welcoming retired Admiral Michael Mullen.
Thanks. Hopefully you weren't told you had to do that. It's a real treat for me to be here, and I'm reminded the first fellow or lecturer was a guy named Admiral Bill Crow, who was a mentor of mine and had the chairman's job in the late 80s and early 90s. So it's special to be connected with him. Secondly, a good friend of mine, Ray Dubois, who's a Taft graduate, asked me to do this. His dad was a Navy admiral, and actually you divide the Navy up into submarines, aviators, guys and gals who fly airplanes, and then ships. And so while Ray's dad was a submariner, when he became an admiral, he became a surface officer focused on ships. But the most important reason I'm here is to try to connect a little bit with you. What the school does here, what you're doing with your lives, is our future. And those of us that have been around a while know how rapid that future arrives. And I'll try to just imprint a couple of messages on those, young, open, eager brains that you have this morning. And the first is on leadership, and the second is on the international situation and how I think it's going to affect you, the totality of your life. I'll try to do this in about 15 or 20 minutes, and then I have a couple minutes, I'm told, to be able to answer questions here, a couple of questions here, and certainly the follow-on meetings that I have. Please feel free to engage me. First of all, it's pretty easy, although it's a long time removed, pretty easy for me to reflect on when I was 16 or 17 or 18 years old. I remember it well, an incredibly important time in my life, and you might ask, well, how did you get from L.A. Into the military? And it's a great question. When I was your age, I actually grew up in Hollywood. My father was a publicity man for some of the biggest names in movies and in the television industry in the 50s and the 60s. Some thought those were the heydays in that regard. I was in high school. I was focused on sports, girls, and academics, and I think pretty much in that order, if I were honest, at that time. But I was the oldest of 5 kids. And I went to an all-boys high school. I was the oldest of 5 kids, and my dad said, if you're going to get a good education, you better find somebody to pay for it. And the Naval Academy recruited me to play basketball there. Not a basketball powerhouse, but it got me in. And I decided I was going to go. Got on a plane in L.A., and I'd only been out of the state when I was 8 years old, on a trip to the Midwest where my parents came from. Got on a plane, flew to Baltimore in June. It was 90 degrees, 95% humidity, and I actually said, are you kidding me? People can actually live in this weather? Because in California, there is no such thing as humidity. What happened that day, though, and I was 17, what happened that day was I met great people from all over the country, and that was exciting. My classmates, some of whom continue to be incredibly dear friends of mine to this day, from 1964 until today. I had no plans to stay in the Navy. This was also a time where Vietnam was, when I graduated in '68, Vietnam was a rage. Literally the night before I graduated, Bobby Kennedy got killed. 3 months before that, Martin Luther King got killed. I actually met my wife in Washington, which was then guarded by the National Guard because Washington was burning. And sometimes we have a tendency to forget what was going on back then. It was a very, very difficult time for our country. I got on a ship when I graduated, went to Vietnam, my first deployment, and it opened up the whole world. Not just the war, but other parts of the world. Fell in love with the people in the Orient, their ethos, their focus on families, and I was pretty excited. And that time frame influenced me up through today. Didn't have any plans to become the chairman, didn't have any plans to become an admiral. That all worked out. What I loved about the Navy was they gave me responsibility early, and back to sort of the people piece. So I commanded a ship in 1973, and my evaluations at that time, my first evaluation was an F. I don't know how your grades go here these days, but back then F was the bottom. You're failing, you flunked, you have no future. And I talked about that. I talk about that, particularly young people, because I think you need to be reaching in your future, and the motto of this school about service is incredibly important. I think you are a generation wired to serve in the future, and we're going to need that. So you have to reach, you have to figure out how much risk you're going to take, and occasionally you're going to fail. And that's okay. It is not about the failure. It's about what you do when you fail. It's about how you handle adversity, how you get up and move on. It took me 11 years of persistence in the Navy, which is one of the reasons I love the Navy, because it's a meritocracy, to recover from that, to get back to another command, and finally erase that "you have no future" line that was in that one evaluation. The Navy saw fit to keep me going. I actually managed to fail again as a more senior officer. And in both those failures, when I was young and when I was sort of a mid-grade officer, it was my desire to learn, my determination to continue to succeed, the love of the Navy and the people and the responsibility, but I couldn't have done it without a friend. I couldn't have done it without a mentor. I couldn't have done it without someone helping me get through this morass that is a bureaucracy called the United States Navy. They saw something in the future, so they sort of got the underbrush out of the way so that in my work I could continue to succeed. Through 2005, President Bush picks me to be the head of our Navy. That if you've gone back to my classmates in high school or my classmates in the Naval Academy, they're going, "What's up with this?" We don't really understand that. And it was a great privilege. Typically, you stay in that job for 4 years. I was there 2 years when Secretary Rumsfeld's successor, Secretary Gates, called me into his office and said, "Want to make you chairman of the Joint Chiefs." Could have blown me over with a feather. Had no idea. I'd been in D.C. a long time. Thought you knew what was going on. Had no idea. So I took that job, and now I'm out of the Navy. I mean, I'm wearing a Navy uniform, but I'm basically out of the Navy. 2 wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, a third one really against terrorism, and I'm a sailor. So the first thing I do is I go to the land forces that are in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's just how I measure what's going on. I'm signing orders every day. Young lives, we're losing lives there. And I want to understand as much as I possibly can about what I'm asking them to do so that when I make decisions in Washington or recommendations in Washington, I can incorporate that. My wife is very active on the family side. Our force is 50% married. The families have been through stress. So I was just kind of doing, if you're 16 in this audience, at 9/11, you're just coming of consciousness, if you will, about something, the outside world to some degree. So when that was happening to you, I had 5, 6, 7-year-olds in my Army families, in particular, Army and Marine Corps, whose mother or father, mostly fathers, were beginning in 2003, 2004 to start 1-year deployments away from home, a year over and a year back, upwards of 5 or 6 times. And so that young boy or girl, all they've known at your age right now is a family at war. Their whole life has been at war. That has never happened before in our country. Extraordinary young people who dedicated themselves. And this military now, back to my Vietnam experience, all volunteer force, best we've ever had. But fewer and fewer people in America know about this military. We come from fewer and fewer places. We're less than 1%. We're disconnected or disconnecting from the American people in a way that, quite frankly, bothers me. And all of us have to do something about that. So the leadership piece for me was what kept me around. And all of the things you'll do, you'll have an interest in, whatever it might be. But in the end, we need leaders. We need people who will show initiative, be bold, courageous, smart about leading people both in our country and, quite frankly, globally. It is now a global village for all intents and purposes, and as you grow up, it is going to be more so. Young people ask me, what languages should I study? I've said for the last 15 years, not that I don't like Romance languages, because I do, but you need to study Chinese and you need to study Arabic, because those are the languages which will require us to be connected. We also, not you per se, but in our country, we can focus inward, and we don't know how, we're not very good at valuing other people's culture, seeing problems through other people's eyes. And I really tried, particularly as chairman, in my counterpart visits, my equivalents in whether it was Pakistan or Russia or Japan or Korea or India, other countries around the world, China, I always tried to sit and listen. I had a phrase I would use routinely from a leadership perspective: listen, learn, and lead, not the other way around, to try to understand what they're thinking about their own requirements. And while I was chairman, I made 27 trips to Pakistan, because I'd been there once before. We can talk about Afghanistan all we want. That is a regional issue, and Pakistan dominates that regional issue. And so I wanted to understand it from their perspective. I was only there 48 months, so it was almost monthly that I was going there. And it's still an extraordinarily dangerous and complex country. Even as it literally in the history of the country, it just completed its first democratic handover from one administration to another in elections which occurred last Saturday. So when I get back to the leadership piece, people ask me, well, what were the toughest days, best days, worst days as chairman? The best day was getting bin Laden. And it was not just because we got the most wanted man in the world, and he'd killed 3,000 Americans plus more, and he was the head of this organization that was coming after us. Certainly that was part of it. But I was also in the military in 1979 and 80 when we had the hostages in Iran, and we lost and crashed at Hilo, lost some great Americans in that rescue attempt. And so it was essentially the return of the United States military to a level of quality and excellence that we hadn't seen. Not just the Special Forces, not just SEAL Team 6, which obviously has gotten a lot of press, but the United States military. It represented a comeback and, quite frankly, a requirement for the United States military in the future. But I'm reminded, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, because 10 weeks later I was walking into Arlington and I was burying 13 SEALs that got shot down in that helicopter, where we lost 38 military members, 8 of whom were from Afghanistan, a short time after the bin Laden rescue. And one of the things that I tried to do as chairman, from a leadership perspective, my wife and I would routinely go to funerals in Arlington. We would routinely talk with parents who'd lost their son or their daughter, with young spouses who were 20 years old with 2 kids, and their husband has been killed. And to commit to them, first of all, try to put a face to this government that was sending their young ones off to war, and secondly, make a connection to them. And they only asked for one thing, quite frankly. They asked that we as a country never forget. That's what mothers and fathers and spouses have talked to us for a long time. That was the hardest part of the war, being with them. And this goes back to Vietnam for me. So your future is being formed right here, whether you know it or not. Mine was in ways I didn't understand. But in Vietnam, the country blamed the military for the war. In these wars, that's not the case, and that's a big deal. And I wanted to put a face on it. I argued heavily to open up Dover to the press for families that wanted to do that, so that America could look at what it was doing, make a conscious decision, and I believe in our system, make a conscious decision about that was okay, and say, yes, we can continue doing this, or no, we shouldn't do that. That's our process, and that's our system, and I really do believe in that. And I was delighted when we got it open in many ways. The third most difficult time was what we call in 2009. So I have a new president. I served with President Bush for 15 months, and as the principal military advisor, if I were going to run a typical day by you, I'm up at 3:15 in the morning. I'm in the gym by 3:45 or 4. I'm there till about 5:30 or 6. I then go back, change, get into the office. I'm on my classified networks, seeing what happened, which I also check before I go to the gym. I usually go to bed about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night. Then I'm in the office at 7, and I'm going from 7 until 7, typically, in meetings with in the White House, with my boss, the Secretary of Defense, with my counterparts from all over the world, et cetera. It was about 40% of my life I was gone from Washington. That is usually a death sentence, if you will, because if you're not at a meeting in Washington, you get fleeced routinely. You need to be at the table. I took that risk because I thought it was really important to be out with those who were fighting and dying for what we believed from a military standpoint, for what was required in terms of the strategy that we had laid out. So, and then when you're a young kid from Southern California, you walk into the White House, you get, the hair goes up in the back of your neck. Isn't it a great nation? Yeah, and in many ways, in that regard, it is. Yet I'm the only military member in the White House, which, this wouldn't surprise you, is full of politics. People who've grown up in politics, people who worked hard to get to the White House, people who want to stay in the White House, and it is the politics of the White House pervades every single issue. It's not that way with just the Obama administration or the Bush administration. It has been that way for many, many administrations. I'm the only military guy. I'm the principal advisor, so I would then make a recommendation to the president to say, yes, here's where I am. I support this or I don't support this, and why. It was a much different life than I was living when I was the head of the Navy. So it was a wonderful opportunity. And one of the reviews we did when President Obama came in was this long review of the Afghanistan-Pakistan strategy. And it was 3 months, hardest 3 months of my professional career. Really broke it open when Stan McChrystal's assessment leaked, and Woodward had it on the front page of the Washington Post. And the president and his people thought the military had boxed him in. And we didn't do it intentionally for sure, but the fact is he was boxed in, because we're taking away the president's decision space, which we should never do. You want him to have as much latitude as you possibly can to make a decision, and this was a big decision. Then you get into trust and relationships. So there's a trust piece that you have to build with a new president when he comes in, and we broke that pretty quickly. So it took me another 2+ years to rebuild that relationship along the lines of trust because of what happened up there, and that was extremely challenging. And then there's a relationship piece where you've got to have relationships, and I'm a relationship-driven individual. Know the people, try to understand what their concerns are, whether it's in the White House or in the interagency with the other departments or around the world. So that trust, relationship, the willingness to dedicate yourself and work hard, responsibility, and leadership. And inside leadership, it's what I call, as a Navy guy, I call it accountable leadership. When you're CO of a ship and your ship goes aground, you leave. You give it over to someone else. That's the tradition, and that is pure accountability. Whether you knew anything about it or not isn't important. You're the captain of the ship. It went aground. You leave. What you're growing up into right now is a time where accountable leadership is pretty difficult to pin down. And in what you find out eventually, you find out it's not about you or me as an individual, it's about the institutions like Taft, which are so important to both preserve not just what's going on now, but to preserve and create the future. So that whole issue of accountability on the part of leaders, that's top leaders, is very difficult. During the time I was chairman, our Air Force managed to move 6 nuclear weapons from North Dakota to Louisiana, and they didn't know they were nuclear weapons. That is a fundamental breach of what their requirement is. And it was my view that the only way that could be fixed in the institution was to have the 2 senior leaders depart, and that's what they did. And that was a very difficult day because the individual who was the head of the Air Force, the military individual, was a very close friend of mine, and that was as hard a day as I had. So leaders are expected to do hard things, and I've talked to you early about leading and getting into positions and taking initiative to get things done. And you're growing up in a world where that's going to happen. I can talk a long time about the international situation right now if you want to do that. I'm also open for questions afterwards. I mean, the things that keep me awake at night, first and foremost, it's our debt as a country. We cannot be the country that we need to be, or expect it to be, or want to be, if we don't get control of our debt. If it just keeps growing, that we will become more and more limited on what we can do. So that's the top of my list. The second thing that I believe in, and I don't know how many of you are going to graduate and be K through 12 teachers, but if you ask me, pick a profession where we are most vulnerable as a country and where you could have most impact, that's it. I am a concerned citizen about K through 12 education. I'm confused. I'm teaching at Princeton. Princeton's got an education policy part of the Wilson School. I'm confused on what the right answer is, quite frankly. There are too many stakeholders who don't get along, and the last thing we seem to be focusing on is the instruction and the teaching of our K through 12 students. And charter schools is a part of it, and choice is a part of it, all that kind of thing. But we cannot scale that to our public school system. I grew up in California, at the time, best public school system in the country. And subsequent to that, where California is right now, we're in the bottom 5 or 6. So that's the second thing. Third thing is the political paralysis in Washington that concerns me greatly. Fourth is cyber warfare. You are going to grow up. You are in the cyber age. You are a cyber warrior, even if you don't know that. There was a story a few months ago where, when I retired, my personal email accounts got hacked. The FBI knocks on my door. It's never a fun feeling, even if it's me, when the FBI shows up and says, "We'd like to talk to you." But that is typical. I understand why that happened, but that is typical in terms of the kinds of attacks that are ongoing right now. And then the last thing I worry about are our veterans and their families as they come home to a hard economy. They've done the Lord's work, if you will, for the country, and it's the first check we ought to write as they return. So you're at a great age. You're at a great place, clearly. You've got a faculty heavily focused on your improvement, your future. Continue to invest in that, and I'm sure we'll all be better off for that. So thank you. That's actually what I call the hook. I've got about 5 minutes, so I can take a couple questions. Yeah.
If you could briefly explain to the students the significance of Dover and what families could see there. I'm not sure.
So Dover is the place where we bring all those military members who are killed overseas back. It's the first place they touch America again. And we prepare the bodies for transfer to the family. It's an extraordinarily difficult task, and what we basically did at Dover was allow families to show up to see their son or daughter, and mothers and dads wanted to do this because it was their return, the return of their son or daughter who'd given their life for their country, their first time on the United States territory. So opening that up to the press, allowing them to be there in a much more expansive way, was a big deal. That's Dover Air Force Base in Dover, Delaware, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Might you be able to comment on how our national debt affects currently or might affect in the future our national security?
It is actually, you've seen, I think, in the papers for the last months now, the whole issue of sequester. Sequester has, in a way, sequester has actually reduced spending. So it's not a process, it's an awful process, it's an awful way to do this. There's a much smarter way to do this than we're doing it right now, and this gets back to the political paralysis that we have in Washington and the inability to make decisions and the inability to work in a bipartisan way, which just isn't there. And I don't know when it's going to be there, quite frankly. So that if we don't get spending under control and we don't figure out on the entitlement side how we're going to control those costs, then our debt's just, very simple math, our debt's going to continue to rise. And the amount of payments, the payment that we have to make on that debt will then, in fact, be money we can't spend somewhere else, whether we don't collect it and American citizens spend it on the economy, or we do collect it and we spend it on other programs that we think are important. And right now, despite the knowledge that we've got to do that, that's obviously not happening. in the military, I put, just healthcare alone, I put $19 billion in the budget in 2011. 2001. In 2011, it was $51 billion. In 2015, it's $65 billion. So that, in a budget, it's now almost 10% of our overall budget in the military, and it will eat us alive. It is unsustainable. It's a very, very good healthcare program, very good healthcare benefit, but it's financially unsustainable, and I think it's a microcosm for where we are in the country. So until the debt starts going down and we have fiscal policies that our businesses have confidence in, and they don't right now, they're holding the money back and they're not investing. They're not hiring, et cetera. The economy can't grow. It's all very much linked together. And national security is a part of that. Yeah?
What do you think would have happened if the Bush administration didn't declare war on terror or use the Bush doctrine after 9/11? Like, what would have happened to the safety of America?
Well, I mean, one of the things I've tried to do is stay out of speculation. And I think history, will spend a lot of time speaking to that. I honestly, let me go to bin Laden. I mean, I dealt with my counterpart in Pakistan for 2.5 years before we ever did that. And I told him, I said, I've worked for 2 presidents. If we find bin Laden, we're going to come and get him. Every president would do that. This guy killed 3,000 Americans. I was in the building when we got hit. It flew in under my office. My 2 assistants literally looked out the window. I wasn't in the office. I was about 50 yards away and saw a 757 come into their feet. We were petrified because we didn't know how many. We didn't know how quickly. It was a huge crisis. So the natural move to do all we could as we did, and particularly go after that terrorist threat, seems reasonable to me. We understand, I mean, Boston is an example. We understand the laydown a whole lot better now than we did back then. Boston, sadly and tragically, and my heart goes out and prayers go out to those families. I'm surprised it took that long to have a Boston occur. And I worry that there will be more, quite frankly. Now, that a lot of people have worked hard to prevent even many up until that point. So presidents focus on those kinds of issues as they should. And both of them made an awful lot happen, even though you may not know exactly what that is. Yeah?
How did you communicate with the Pakistani government after the
I called my friend. The question was, how did I communicate with the Pakistani government? So after we got bin Laden. So again, I'd worked with him a long time. This is the head of their army, who isn't my exact equivalent, but he is the head of the military in Pakistan. I had a very close relationship with him. So literally 2 or 3 hours after the operation, and we were clear of Pakistan, I called him to give him the news. He certainly knew something big had happened. We lost a helicopter. It was actually, somebody was tweeting on this thing, as it happened, or within a few minutes of it happening. So the word was out in the social media world about something's going on, didn't know what it was. And they talk a lot about this being at the place where the military academy is. If I were to take one of our military academies, Air Force in Colorado Springs, Annapolis, West Point, that's a big military town because it's got a lot of cadets or midshipmen. It's not a big military town because it's got a lot of military capability there. But it's a high-end neighborhood, high-end area, it was pretty tough news when I relayed that information to him. But the point is, I'd invested that relationship. It would have been in that relationship. It would have been a very bad time for it to have been the first phone call that I ever had with a guy. Hi, I'm Mike Mullen, and here's what I got for you. We had an understanding. We had a long conversation about it. It wasn't just, hi, here's what I got, nothing. That's why the investment in relationships is so critical. I met my Russian counterpart as they invaded Georgia in 2008. I talked to him 7 times over the weekend. We had no other communications with the Russians at the time. There were no communications from state to state or from head of state to head of state. And I didn't know him, but at the end of each conversation, which was very scripted, he basically said, let's leave the light on here and have a conversation. So I met with him after that. We actually got to know each other pretty well, and 2 years later, we're negotiating, principal part of the negotiations for nuclear weapon drawdown from both countries. So it's just how I have focused in terms of what I think is important about leading and having relationships. And a question for you, I'll just leave you with this, and I know I got to get off stage here. I get asked about the impact of social media on the revolution in Egypt, the whole Arab awakening. And yes, it is an awareness network, and yes, it did a lot. But there has to be, I think, an emergence of leadership in a situation on the social network. Isn't this great? Okay, the government has been overturned. Now what? And there wasn't, that didn't happen. And it's not happening in Libya. So there's a responsibility that goes with that kind of technology, as good as it is and as quick as it is, that I think we need to think our way through with respect to how we move forward, not just how we just discuss an event as it's occurring, particularly if you're looking at the kind of change that occurred there, and change that you will see for your whole life. We're just on the beginning of the Middle East and its turmoil and its turnover, 20, 30 years or so before that even has a possibility of settling down. Okay, thanks and good luck.